Welcome, everyone. If you could please take a seat at the table, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer Carlett. I'm a Special Projects Manager at the Metro Planning Department, and I thank you on behalf of the Planning Department and Nashville Next for being here this afternoon for this important conversation about transportation, featuring Gabe Klein, a senior fellow at ULI and a transportation official who has worked in Chicago and Washington, D.C., and is here today to share his insights on how we create transportation across bikes and peds for automobiles and for buses and other forms of transit for a successful 21st century city. I wanted to thank our many partners who helped us to host this event, the Nashville chapter of the Urban Land Institute and Rose Vegas Easton, their district council coordinator. It was ULI who brought Gabe in, and we were very, very thrilled that they were willing to share some of his time and expertise. The Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Metro Transit Authority, the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee, Transit Now, Walk Bike Nashville, who's providing our bike parking today, and the staff at Municipal Auditorium. Before we get started, I wanted to encourage you all, if you want to continue the conversation on social media, you can use the hashtag NashvilleNext. And also, if you'll please sign in on the yellow sign-in sheets that are at your table so that we can get you more information about Nashville Next in the future. If you have, during this presentation, a specific question for Gabe, there are index cards on your table that you can write out questions. Whenever you have a question ready, just raise that card up in the air and one of our staff will collect it, and then we'll get those questions to Gabe to answer during the second part of his presentation. If you run out of the cards, just use a Post-it. All right, and then finally, on the questions at your table and all of the work that you do at your table, we ask you to please write as legibly as possible so that we can make sure we get all of your ideas down for Nashville Next. So there are written agendas at your table. We're going to kind of toggle tonight back and forth between hearing from Gabe and then doing a couple of table exercises. And I wanted to start real briefly with asking people, how many folks have been involved with Nashville Next up to this point? All right, a lot of folks who've been here, a lot of new folks as well. Nashville Next is a planning effort and a process to create a plan for Nashville's growth, prosperity, and well-being for the coming 25 years. It is involving unprecedented levels of community input, from community meetings, online presence, to also having Nashvillians with topical expertise serve on resource teams about Nashville Next. And we're really thrilled that you're part of this community conversation tonight. In terms of the community input, we started in phase 1 by asking people, what is your vision for Nashville in the next 25 years? In phase 2, we asked folks to prioritize their goals. Phase 3, we asked Nashvillians to tell us, where do you want to grow and what do you want to preserve? And from that conversation, Nashville Next has created 3 different futures or alternative ways that we can grow and matching transportation systems. And this summer, online, in community meetings, through texting, we're asking Nashvillians to weigh in and tell us which of those growth patterns they would like to see in the future. If you want to be involved in that picking of a future, please go to nashvillenext.net/pick, and you can do that exercise online. Tonight is not the first night that we've been talking about transportation in Nashville Next. When we did a prioritization of goals, you can see that transit and walkable neighborhoods made our top 5 of the priorities from Nashvillians about what they want to see in the future. But also affordable living is up there, and we know that transportation is a big part of an individual and a family's budget, and so that touches on transportation. And then obviously, to help grow our economy, we need to move people to their jobs, we need to move freight through the area, and so transportation again plays a big role there. A few things that will impact Nashville in the coming 25 years and impact our conversation on transportation. there are a lot of demographic changes that will impact the transportation of the future. We're a growing region, and the projections are that in the next 25 years, Davidson County will grow by about 200,000 new people and will host about 300,000 new jobs. You can see from this graph, however, that Rutherford County and Williamson County to the south are actually growing at an even faster clip, meaning that the transportation conversation that we're having today and throughout Nashville Next is very regionally focused. We're trying to think about our region as a whole and how we create transportation systems that benefit our quality of life and our economy. In addition to just having more people that want to get around, there's also some changes in the demographics of Nashvillians that I think are going to impact how we want to get around in the future. Namely, we're seeing that baby boomers are interested in downsizing and being in neighborhoods where they have walkable amenities or amenities that are, and services that are available to them via transit. Meanwhile, the millennials, another huge demographic cohort, are also looking to live in areas that have transit and walkability and bikeability available to them. And so throughout our Nashville Next conversation on transportation, we've had folks who've said, hey, can we have one of those back to the basics conversations about what we need to be offering as a city to be successful in terms of transportation? And that is why Gabe is here tonight. To set the Nashville context before Gabe speaks, I'm going to invite Michael Briggs, the transportation planner for Metro Planning, to the stage to discuss how we get around Nashville today and what is planned for the future. Michael?
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon. Let me first explain a couple of the items that are around the room. You'll notice at the kind of corners of the seating area, we have existing maps for you to take a look at. And so we want you to think about the different elements of the current transportation system. And when thinking about Nashville's future, a multimodal network really needs to be conceptualized. And so this means connecting our existing streets with transit and supporting land uses and infrastructure that make it easy to walk and bike to destinations. And we want you to begin thinking about how can we make our existing streets more complete. Also at your tables, you've got 11 by 17 packets. They're the large sheets of paper that are stapled. They have various future visions of components of our transportation system. And you'll note that these plans are both regional in nature, and then some are also focused just on Davidson County. They include things like streets, frequent transit lines, greenways, bikeways, and sidewalks. And so in our table discussions, we will ask you to consider the existing transportation system that's around the room, but then also think about what is planned and is envisioned at your table. I'll also mention at the back corner, we've got a series of maps that you're welcome to take home with you if you're interested in Greenways maps, the Groove biking map, and the MTA transit system map. Let me first start off talking about some bad news. And this graphic shows the amount of infrastructure needs identified for 5 years from 2012 to 2017. And it compares with the actual amount spent on infrastructure from 2008 to 2013. And if you look at this closely, you can easily tell that spending doesn't come close to meeting the needs identified. Nashville was aggressively widening streets and building new roads in the 1990s. You'll remember Harding Place, Trinity Lane, I-65 north and south of town, I-40 to Bellevue were all widened during this time. And things have changed since the gas tax, which is the primary source of funding for road maintenance and expansion, has really remained stagnant since 1993. It has not kept pace with inflation, while vehicles have also become more fuel efficient. The result is that there's less funding for transportation, and this has drastically impacted the revenue source for streets for many local and different levels of government. These financial constraints really beckon our attention to be very strategic about our investments more than ever. And so let me go through a few examples, and this is just a snippet of information that tell a story about transportation and where we are headed in Middle Tennessee. The demographic changes that Jennifer noted, with more people wanting to walk, bike, and take transit, and then the financial constraints I mentioned are impacting the data that departments of transportation use to analyze traffic congested corridors. The data is showing that people are changing how they get around Nashville. They take other less congested routes or shift to other modes of transportation. And here are 3 examples of traffic counts on Nashville arterial streets, and this depicts the amount of vehicles that pass through an area over 24 hours. This data begins in the late 1980s and goes through 2013, and in all 3 instances, the amount of traffic has declined since the mid-2000s before the recession. Nationally, the amount of vehicle miles traveled per capita, also another indicator of traffic, has declined for the past 9 years. So where is the traffic going? People are traveling less in general. They're finding other less congested routes, as I mentioned, but they're also using mass transit more. This graph shows ridership since the early 2000s for the Nashville MTA system. Transit ridership increased before the recession, and similar to other forms of travel, transit ridership declined during the recession, but since 2011, that trend is going back up. This also depicts routes that go in and out of Davidson County to the surrounding counties. Those have increased too, and these are the numbers for the Music City Star and the RTA bus service. The ridership increase, you'll note, is closely related to the addition of new service of routes, which are noted on the screen. And then you've also probably seen the rows of red bikes around town with the big B in front of them, and that is B-Cycle, and that's the new bike share network that was launched in Nashville in 2012. You can check out bikes to get from one destination to another, and there are now 25 stations, and the network has recently expanded beyond the 440 interstate loop. Total memberships in B-Cycle have increased the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year. And so when offered options to get around Nashville, some people appear to take advantage of them. The vision of so many people is scattered around the room with the existing transit, biking, walking, and street networks. And our vision for Nashville for the next 25 years cannot be sustained only on road improvements. Through Nashville Next, we have an opportunity to connect the pieces of our transportation system, and we will layer the regional transit vision with our plan for greenways and connecting people to nature. And for greenways can also be an attractive option for those not comfortable with biking on streets and not just for exercise. And these also need to be connected to our plans for bikeways. And multi-use paths, bike lanes, bike routes, protected lanes are key connections between greenways and neighborhoods, which then also should connect to the sidewalk network. These all need to be layered together, but given in the context of our existing street system. And we have to assume that our street system is, for the most part, built out at this point. This means we have to squeeze as much out of our streets for all users as possible. They can't only be used for traffic. And so we want you to think this afternoon about how all of these pieces fit together, listen to Gabe's perspective, and tell us how we can make transportation better here in Nashville. Right now, with Nashville Next, we're asking you to pick between 3 futures. The 3 futures adjust the frequent transit system based on where growth is most likely to occur in each future. This minimal level of frequent transit service will be similar to the Gallatin and Murfreesboro Road BRT light routes that exist today. In each instance, the land use and type of development may change to better fit each scenario that accommodates moving more people. So we're asking you right now to be thinking about business as usual, and should we continue in that sort of growth and development pattern? This would only expand our frequent transit network to a few arterials, and those are shown in red on the map. Or do we want land uses that support frequent transit service on more of the arterial pikes, radiating into and out of downtown? And so this future that looks at downtown and pikes depicts that. Or should we have denser land uses that are more clustered, so frequent transit service connects between the pikes, so that one doesn't have to travel into downtown and back out to get across town? And so I encourage you to talk to our planners about these futures and participate in the discussion online and at the lounges. The land use and transit vision conceptualized in Nashville Next will set the stage for future updates of the city's transit plan, greenways plan, bikeways plan, and sidewalks plan. All of these plans and any future corridor studies will require future community input and discussion about impacts. And so now let me introduce our expert, Gabe Klein. Gabe is a senior visiting fellow with the Urban Land Institute and is the former chief for the Chicago and Washington, D.C. Departments of Transportation. He is known nationally for thinking creatively about using transportation investments to create successful cities and improving quality of life. I think you'll want to hear what Gabe has to say about the options that are out there for transportation in our cities. And so let's please welcome Gabe Klein.
Thanks, man. All right, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I just got into Nashville a few hours ago and got a great tour of the city. I was here about a year ago, actually, for the ITS America, Intelligent Transportation System of America conference at the Gaylord, and had the opportunity to spend a little time in Nashville. And I tried to walk around the entire city. And you know, I can tell you there's definitely room for improvement. There's some great things happening here in Nashville. The development and the potential for even more dense development is huge. But without the transportation network to link it all together, unfortunately, it's not complete. So what I'd like to do, I think we're going to switch things up just a little bit in the interest of time because we're running a little behind. Instead of breaking me into 2 sessions, I think I'm going to speak for maybe about 30 minutes straight or so, and then we'll do the table stuff, and then I'll try to do a little Q&A afterwards. One of the things you should know about me is I've spent the majority of my career actually in the private sector, mostly in startups with companies like Zipcar, and I sort of by accident wound up in government, and it's been an amazing experience. But these strategies that I'm going to talk about today, these are pro-growth, pro-business, pro-people strategies for successful cities, and they all go together. This is an image, actually. Most of it's real, and some of it's a little bit futuristic, from Chicago, where we put in a new transit station and got about $1 billion worth of investment, literally within a matter of about 12 months, including Google renting 300,000 square feet a block north, a new hotel, and lots of new restaurants. And as I talk about what's coming in the future, I'd like to actually step back and talk a little bit about the past. Who knows actually where the first electric streetcar was in the United States? Anybody? April 30th, 1890, it launched in Nashville. So Nashville's been at the forefront of transportation for a long time. That's before DC, San Francisco. This is an electric taxi cab. In 1908, I believe, in New York City. They had 800 of them, charging stations, the whole nine. So we tend to think that we're on the edge of all the new technology, and the fact is we've done a lot of these things before. It's just that we made a lot of mistakes over the years. This is Woodward Avenue in Detroit. Who's been to Detroit lately? Woodward Avenue doesn't look like this anymore. It used to be very congested with people. It's not congested anymore. We tend to think that congestion is bad. Congestion's a wonderful thing. The more congestion you have, the more lively your city is, the more business you have. Now, you don't necessarily want to have cars backed up spewing out fumes, but you want congestion. You want mixed congestion, just like you see here in this picture. Privatization of services and right-of-way. This is Harold Dobbins' first protected bike facility in 1902 in California. He charged a 5-cent toll to use it. The sharing economy has been going for a long time. It was going out of necessity back during World War I and World War II. Lots of people living on top of each other, and they needed green space. So the Garden City and all the wonderful parks that we have in a lot of our old cities are a function of the fact that people didn't have space. They lived in 300, 400, 500 square foot places. Even when we went beyond tenements out to the suburbs, we got maybe up to 700 square feet. And the bicycle, this guy, Percy Neville, this is like his third job. He's 11 years old, working for Western Union. The bicycle was a very basic form of transportation, and actually a lot of wealthy people rode bikes as well back around the turn of the last century. And we talk a lot about the tension between all of the modes. People get mad at the cyclist who's in the middle of the road or on the sidewalk, and the pedestrian on their cell phone crossing against the light. And people don't like the big SUVs. Well, look, this is 1928. We had the horse and buggy, the electric streetcar, the automobile. We went from 8,000 automobiles to about 25 million automobiles over 20 years. So talk about the pace of change. And that's the kind of thing that we're experiencing now. And Times Square, the epitome of a busy intersection in a city, streetcars ruled our streets. Whether it was Nashville or DC or San Francisco, every city, major, secondary, tertiary city had streetcars, all of them. And they linked our neighborhoods and connected our communities, and we got rid of them, and we have not recovered. Now, we did have the Federal Highway Act in the 50s with the intention of linking together our cities and creating an economic driver so we could move freight. And it was an admirable effort. Unfortunately, we took it too far. And the highways were supposed to end at the cities, but we started tearing the heart out of our cities, all of our cities, DC, Nashville, all these freeways. I was just in Charleston a couple weeks ago, and all the buildings around the freeway coming into the city, they're all boarded up. And you go about 10, 20 blocks away, and the real estate is just booming. Nobody wants to build under the highway. And when we put highways through our cities, we tore the heart out of our cities. And we segregated our communities as well. And we built the suburbs. The Levitts, whoever they were, made a lot of money. But there was a downside. There were lots of downsides. But we created a commuting culture with automobiles. And the automobile industry, let's be honest, they had a hand in shutting down the streetcars as well, in creating the bus industry. We thought that bikes were the future, but it would take another 40 years or so to get there. And even in the late 60s, some government agencies were realizing, this is in London, that we had made some mistakes already that we need to undo. Same thing in Copenhagen, a lot of the northern European countries. There were actually protests in Copenhagen. Tens of thousands of people came out in the streets and protested against the car culture because so many children were dying, getting hit by cars. In fact, does anybody know how many people we lost on the world's roads last year? Anybody? 1.24 million people. It's the biggest killer of teenagers. People aged 10 to 19 worldwide is automobiles. So fast forward to today. This is sort of what we've created. We've got big houses in the suburbs and jobs in the city center, big parking lots near the strip malls, and strip malls and strip malls. But as was just up there before I got up there, you saw that the driving is going down and transit use is going up. And in fact, for a long time, you had more people you had more cars than you had people owning homes. Now, there are other ramifications. We have an obesity problem, which we didn't have. I buy a lot of vintage clothes. I think I'm a medium. I'm not, like, when I buy clothes from the 40s and 50s that are medium, they're super tight on me. I'm like an extra large in 1940s or 50s sizes. Everything has changed because we used to be active. We used to walk. We used to bike. We used to take transit. And even our planes and our trains are having to change because of the size of our human beings. Now, younger people, and I would sort of include myself in that, I'm a Gen Xer. People are less interested in owning stuff than they used to be. We used to sort of measure our success based on how much stuff we had. And the newer generations coming up, they really don't care about that. They're more focused on the experience of life. Now, having said that, it's not just that people want to do good. I mean, doing good is some of it, but also people want to have a hassle-free life. They want to save money. The average doctor today at like 42 has $200,000 in student loans. I mean, our economics have changed. We had 4.5 million people in 2007 with part-time jobs. Now we have 7.7 million. So the economy's changing, and therefore people are more willing to share things and own less as well. And technology is helping us to overcome some of the barriers that have kept people from doing this in the past. So when I left to move to Chicago a few years ago to run the transportation department, there were no co-working spaces in DC. Now I think there's 5 or 6, and people are incubating 50-person companies in these co-working spaces. Airbnb is a multi-billion-dollar company with no real assets. All they do is create a marketplace for people to share the excess capacity, those lazy assets in their home. In fact, I have a friend who just quit her job that she hated, and the extra bedroom in her house is what allowed her to make ends meet and actually quit the job. And people are sharing everything: dresses, baby clothes, tools, you name it, there's a marketplace online for it. So in a nutshell, we're moving from the me economy to the we economy. And this is a good thing. With all the environmental pressures we have, my iPhone takes 20 tons of minerals to create one iPhone, 20 tons. So thank God Apple is actually recycling those now. But basically, we can't afford to continue down the path of having everybody own every single item they have in triplicate, or a car. It just doesn't work. Not with the population going to 9 billion by 2050. So, how are we sharing things? Well, bike share is a great example. Whether it's Melbourne or London or DC or Nashville, bike sharing is everywhere now. And it's become the kind of thing that if you're a mayor and you don't have a bike sharing system, it's embarrassing to go to the mayor's conference. Everybody's got a bike share system. And it's not just because it's a shiny little object, it's really functional. When I told people in DC, we launched the first large-scale bike share system in the US, that people would ride bikes in their suits, they thought I was crazy. Or that people would ride the bus in their suits. Come to DC now or go to Chicago, you'll see half the people on bike share bikes are in suits. We launched Divvy in Chicago with 300 stations and 3,000 bikes over 90 days, and it's literally changed the way people move around Chicago, particularly that first and last mile connection. The new technology is modular, it's mobile, it's solar powered. You can drop a station in 20, 30 minutes, so you don't have to do a major construction project. And we market these services like they're private sector companies, just like we did Zipcar. And they're everywhere. And that's the important thing. If you want a system to work, whether it's a bus system, a rail system, you can look at the People Mover in Detroit that goes to one little loop. We had a bike share system in DC. We had a pilot with 10 stations. It was good that we did it. We learned a lot. But when we went to 100 stations and then 300 stations, then it became usable as a transit system. Now it's expanded to Maryland, so it's in all 3 states: Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And when we asked people, would you like to ride? They said, yeah, we'd love to ride, but we don't feel safe, particularly on Chicago streets. If you've been in Chicago and tried to walk or bike, up until the last couple of years, it was scary. But we've done a lot of things. We're putting in hundreds of miles of bike lanes. We're also using automated enforcement, which I'll talk about if I have time a little bit later. But as I was saying before, we can't afford to put money into roads because people aren't driving as much either. And we can't expand our roads. If you expand roads and keep building parking, you'll never dig out of the problem. Ever, ever, ever. The problem will get worse. Look at the 22-lane freeways in LA that are so congested that people are driving in the grass. And unfortunately, I don't have that picture in here, but you cannot build your way out of it. nor do we need to. Those times have peaked. And what people have to realize is the car-centric planning from the 50s through the, let's say, mid-90s, it's just a blip. Humans have been on the earth, I don't know how long, I'm not an anthropologist, what, 10, 20, 50,000 years? You know, we can't let 35 years of planning, you know, dictate the next 1,000 years. And again, people are realizing the economics. If you want that $350,000 condo downtown, can you really afford $1,000 a month for a car? So developers are also realizing, which is why ULI pulled me in, that if they can build fewer parking spaces at $65,000 a pop, you can make the economics work on a building and more people will move downtown. More people move downtown than they are driving from the suburbs to their job, then you actually don't need to make more investments in your transportation. I mean, you always need more investments, but different investments. The fact is we have a land use problem as much as we have a transportation problem, or even more so, a land use problem. So, I think I've shown enough slides. Oh, well, this one is interesting, actually. You can see from 2008 versus 1978, people are getting licensed less. And in DC, actually, we saw, as our population has exploded, we've seen a 6% drop in licensure because we have so many options, so many layers of transportation options for people. So you can look at old and new. Like, if anybody wants to make $1 billion in the new tech economy, just find something old and couple it with a cell phone, or a smartphone, I should say, and you can make $1 billion. We had hitchhiking, now we have ride sharing, on demand, real time. I think Lyft is actually here, and they just raised $300 million. Not as much as Uber, who just raised another $1.2 billion, is valued at $18 billion. That tells you this is real business, real money, sharing things. And nobody wants to ride with Hitler. This is an old propaganda slide or poster. Car sharing, Zipcar, Car2Go, is exploding in growth. In fact, it came from Europe over here. I was lucky enough to help build Zipcar, and then now it's bigger in the US than anywhere in the world as we re-urbanize. And you can see that younger folks, by the way, are much more apt not only to bike and walk, but to take the bus. And what's really fascinating, and I've seen some of this research, I don't have it on slides, empty nesters moving back to cities, they have more in common with millennials than anybody else. They want the same things as millennials. So it's not really an age thing, it's more about why you're moving back to the city, where you live, and what you want to do. And there's TOD. So when you're building that bus rapid transit stop, and people are arguing, well, we don't really want to put, $100,000 in that stop. Let's just put a standard bus stop in. There's a reason to spend some money and build a grand station or stop. If it's beautiful, and it's a place that people want to be, and they want to take transit because of it, it'll also increase property values dramatically around it. And you see it over and over and over, whether it's the Cleveland Health Line, the streetcar that we're putting in on H Street, which has gotten $2 or $3 billion worth of investment around it. This is a station we spent about $50 million putting in. This station disappeared in 1947 because the city didn't think that it needed it. It was becoming an industrial area. We put it back, and as I said, this is the same station I opened up with. Google opened up 300,000 square feet, a new hotel went in, and it was named one of the hottest neighborhoods in the country by Details magazine, if anybody even reads Details anymore. It's also won tons of awards, so on and so forth. So we're building more stations in Chicago. Again, this is just TOD on the spectrum of TOD. Bus rapid transit is TOD. I would argue that bike share stations are TOD, particularly if the network's big enough. And there's new technology. I know this looks crazy. I've ridden in one of these. This is General Motors Puma that they've designed with Segway. There are new vehicles being built down south in North Carolina that are cross between a bike and a car for people that need to make short trips. And even little pickup trucks slash taxi cabs that this company's building. So there's the issue of getting around in the city, and then there's the issue of connecting all these mega regions. That's sort of where we are, right? Is that where we are, approximately? Yeah? Okay, good. And look, I know this is a contentious issue, but who's been to Europe lately? Anybody been, or Asia, on a 220-mile-per-hour train? It's pretty amazing. You don't need to have a car in Europe. In fact, I was in Copenhagen, and by the way, I just want to say I love cars personally, but you don't want to have to rely on them all the time. And I was in Copenhagen, and I said, why are there no cars? Like, everybody's biking everywhere. And they said, well, there's lots of reasons. You know, we have the differentiated infrastructure, so you have the sidewalk, and then it's grade separated down to the bike lane, then grade separated down to the street. I mean, it's extremely safe. But they said, you know, if you want to buy that $30,000 car in America, here it's $90,000 by the time it gets to your door. Plus gas is $9 a gallon. So they sort of disincentivize you to buy a car. So then the question is, how do we get where we need to go? So in Chicago, we made a bold move, and we declared publicly with the mayor how we were going to prioritize our city streets. And if you don't declare it, the de facto is the car. So we said, you know what, if we want to have a healthy city, and when I say a healthy city, not just physically healthy, but economically healthy, safe, for elderly people, for our children, and if you plan for those folks, everybody else will be okay. You got to look out for pedestrians first. And pedestrians are transit users. They are cyclists, and they are auto users. But everybody is a pedestrian every single day. And so people like me, our jobs have changed dramatically. This is what we used to focus on. Very simple. And still, in a lot of places, this is what people are focusing on. But if you look at what I talked about when I was in Chicago or DC, I very rarely talked about transportation. It's really about people, and it's about our economy and our quality of life. And if you focus on those things, then you have a much clearer understanding of what we need to do from a transportation standpoint. And so in terms of things that you can do to get there, one of the first things I did in DC, I had no experience working in government. I went and looked at the old streetcar maps because I wanted to learn the history of the city and why we had made certain planning decisions and changes. This is Pennsylvania Ave in DC. Earl Blumenauer, a congressman from Oregon, challenged me to find a way to put bike lanes on Pennsylvania Avenue. So I went back and looked at the network, which also was instructive in building our new streetcar network, or designing it. And I asked the mayor, could we put a bike lane down the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue? Because it was empty. And he said yes. And there's the Secretary of Transportation with the mayor and myself and Earl Blumenauer and some other dignitaries. And we just repurposed that space. And people complained. You had AAA complained. You had various folks coming out of the woodwork. You had a shrill minority of people complaining. Now, it's a national example of how to do a bike lane on a major boulevard. Downtown is typically off limits for alternative transportation. It's tough, it's hard. And I'll tell you a quick story. When we launched Zipcar, we had a competitor, FlexCar, and they were doing car sharing as well, but they would go out to the suburbs and get the easy spots. And we would fight tooth and nail for the spots in the core where parking was painful. We put them out of business, we bought them, and we went public. You've got to take the streets back in the central area of the city first. And the mayor and I put a protected bike facility down Dearborn, right in the middle of the city. And it increased safety dramatically for all users, and throughput is now better for automobiles. And the thing is, people think, well, if I'm going to take from here and give to there, then I'm going to lose here. And that is just not true, because our streets are so terribly inefficient that if you do minor improvements, like the road diet I saw today on my tour, where you take 4 lanes and go to 2, and then put a turn lane in the middle, you can increase the quality of operations for automobiles, for buses. And so we put sensors in the bike lane, we put sensors in the car lanes, we added turn lanes, and everybody's better off, and the pedestrians in particular are much safer. And now Biking is up 400% in the core. So it's pretty easy stuff. It's paint and bollards. Now you can go back and do fancy stuff with granite or concrete or whatever you want, but these are inexpensive treatments. It just takes a little bit of political courage. Our streets, when I got to Chicago, were completely unsafe, particularly the arterial streets. The first thing you notice when you look on the left at Elston, not only is the pavement in horrible condition, there are no markings. So by putting in the bike lane, we actually put some organization to the road. And what you see is you see accidents fall dramatically. You see fatalities eliminated for the most part. And you make it safer for everybody, except for the cars sitting in the bike lane up there. Ignore that. This is a traditional road diet, which I saw today here, where you go from 4 lanes to 2, and you put in a turn lane. Better operations. We had elderly folks living in a home actually on the street, and somebody got hit by a car. And this has made it dramatically safer for people on the street and provided a safe place to bike. Again, now this is an industrial area, but a link. Look at how unsafe it is on the left. And you could put a bus lane in, or a bike lane, or a wider sidewalk. It's not just bike lanes. But these are safety projects for all users. And you can see, like on the left, people were passing on the inside. It was completely disorganized. Now it's organized. And on Milwaukee Avenue, we finally gave people a bike lane that they could appreciate, and it's the busiest bike corridor in the United States now. So it took some courage, it took some different applications, and volume in a big city. There's another road diet. So then there's premium transit. I worked on streetcar in Washington, D.C. I love streetcar. It's very tough. You know, when we paved over the streetcar tracks, we did irreparable damage to our cities. And in some ways, we can never undo it because we'll never have the money. It would take, I think, over $30 billion to put the system back in DC that we paved over. But with the bus, we can do a lot. And in Chicago, we started building a bus rapid transit system. The first thing we attacked was Union Station and downtown, but the real game changer will be the Ashland BRT. Now, it's always controversial. Always. Because you got to take a lane of traffic, unless you want to expand your road, but that defeats the purpose of the project because the idea is to do it inexpensively. So in our case, this is a 16-mile north-south route. We had to either take a lane away from parking or from traffic. When we talked to the public, they would have rather lost a traffic lane. Now what we figured out is if we had dedicated lanes, we could speed up the BRT. In fact, we could get it almost to 18 miles per hour, which is very close to the subway speed. And if we could do that, then our ridership would go through the roof. And the fact is, the bus is not very reliable right now in most places. You can't count on it. It doesn't go very fast. I can tell you through the loop in Chicago, it goes 2 to 3 miles per hour. So I regularly would outwalk the bus. You're not going to grow bus ridership if you don't give any priority to the bus. And what we also figured out downtown is while 4% of the traffic was buses, 47% of the people going through the loop were on buses. 4% of the traffic is buses, 47% of the people are on buses. That means that it's way more efficient to move people on buses, but we weren't giving them any priority. So when you recreate a street like this, it really gives you an opportunity to create a complete street. And guess what? The street network is just like the human body. You constrict one artery, the blood goes elsewhere. There's another street that looks just like Ashland next to it called Western. The traffic will move over to Western. Now here's downtown, right by the mayor's office. This is what it looks like here now. This is what it'll look like afterwards. So we'll take a lane, we'll put in a protected bike facility, we'll put in a platform in the street, the bus lane, and what you'll see if you look up to the top there, you'll see we're adding a turn lane in to improve operations. Again, my prediction is you'll see zero change for auto traffic if we engineer it properly. And it's culminating in the Union Station Transportation Center where all the modes are going to meet. Of course, there's technology, so you can actually give the green to the bus, which is very important. It's pretty high tech, but it's pretty simple to understand in many ways. And I don't have time to go into this. I'll probably go into it more in my talks tomorrow. But dollar for dollar, you can't beat BRT in terms of the return on investment. And more government has to look at the return on investment. And you can look at this IDTP brochure. You can Google it, IDTP Bus Rapid Transit, and pull up all this information. It's very important for the government to support development along the corridor, and also to connect from established nodes to areas that have a lot of potential. And we have to realize it's not just about the speed of moving people, although that's very important. But it's also about creating that great place. This is the new streetcar in DC on H Street. And we're projecting about $8 billion of new investment in real estate around the streetcar. And then I was going to go into all this public space stuff, but I don't think we're going to have time. So I think what I'm going to do is wrap it up here. If there's more time later, I can cover some more stuff and also do some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Okay, for folks who showed up a little bit late, I did want to remind everybody that on your table are some brightly colored cards. If you have a question about anything that Gabe talked about, please write out your questions on that card. If you run out of cards, grab a Post-it and do the same. And then if you've written out your questions, raise it up in the air and one of our staff will grab those up and we'll bring them up to Gabe. And after we do our exercises, then we can have Gabe answer your questions. Okay, so fiddling a little bit with the agenda, we're going to go ahead and lump together the two different table exercises that we had. So on your agenda, it's item number 3 and item number 5. So basically what we're asking folks to do, and you're going to work on this kind of doing it yourself at your own tables, we're asking you to take the largest sheet on your table, which has little pictures of Post-it notes on it, and then use the Post-it notes that, the actual sticky notes that are on your table, and discuss amongst yourselves what you think some of the challenges and opportunities are for transit for Nashville and the region in the coming 25 years. And then if you want to think through some of what you've heard from Gabe and see if there are any ideas that you think could address some of those challenges or make those opportunities into a reality, then you can write those down as well. The instructions for the two exercises are on the back of your agenda. And again, it's you guys leading it on your own at your own tables, but if you have any questions, just raise your hand and a planning staff member will come by and try to help you with your questions. Why don't we, it's about 3 minutes till 5. Why don't we spend about 20 minutes on these two exercises together, and then we'll grab Gabe back up here and have him answer some of your questions. Okay, thanks so much.
So one challenge to sidewalks, and I need a good architect or civil engineer, is we always have to do stormwater infrastructure before we can build sidewalks, which makes it incredibly expensive. Somebody needs to invent a sidewalk that the water can just run underneath, and then we just put the sidewalks everywhere, and it wouldn't be nearly as expensive. So architects, do that one for me.
Getting the B-cycles, that's helped. I mean, those things are used all the time.
Yeah, they wear them.
They're used all the time.
I thought that example in DC to see how many B-cycle stations there were. It's phenomenal. I noticed there were a lot more in New York City last time I was there, but to see it on a map, wow, it's a lot of stations.
We just added some more B-cycle stations. We're further out. We're on the other side of 440 now with the B-cycle station. So yeah.
You made it outside 440.
Yeah. So the more cyclists and the more critical mass of non-motorized traffic users you have, the better, the more bike lanes will be installed, the more people you see. The thing that I hear complaints from car drivers, well, the bike lane's there and I don't ever see a bicycle in it. Well, I'm going to make sure I ride all the bike lanes every chance I get, because I want the cars to see a bicycle in that bike lane.
I saw some little traffic, I don't know what they're called, the wires they put in the road to count automobiles. They have them in the bike lanes on Music Row now, just in the bike lanes, not just. So I just noticed.
And there's actually, we just heard some interesting talks not too long ago about how if you actually have more green space between roads and actually kind of move that infrastructure to the sides of where the river is and things like that, you can control stormwater runoff and actually lessen the impact on our sewers and basically our stormwater management systems. If we have more green space, and if you have more green space, more trees, more shade on the roads where the bike lanes are, so then it's not as hot to ride on the bike lane, and then it's just a nicer drive, for everybody to want to walk and actually ride their bike. Whereas opposed to now, we always have the mentality of point A to point B. How am I going to get there, and how can I do it in my own personal way? I think that's one of those things that's kind of really interesting. And every time I look at that image up there, that's what keeps making me think of it. It's like, yeah, how can we make our streetscapes more enjoyable? And if you think about places like Charlotte, Charlotte's nice too, but like Charleston and things like that, they're really beautiful streetscapes. You see the beautiful trees on the sidewalks. And
people want to walk there. They want to ride their bike.
They want to stroll around, And then you want to just kind of meander and get where they go,
And you think about the places that most people want to go to that they really enjoy, the car's not even there. You think about Mackinac Island. You think about Nantucket, where there's no cars.
Any thoughts?
No, I get that. I think probably most people are here. I think that,
Are we going around in a circle or? Either way.
Whatever.
Whoever feels comfortable. Okay, so on that similar line, I put in the challenges. Like my parents live in Brentwood. I grew up in Brentwood and Nolensville, so like most of my friends are there. So I make the 30-minute trips back and forth, so like almost an hour a day, a couple of times a week, just hang out with friends or go see my parents. And so that one of the big challenges I think is that inter-city communication. Like there needs to be an inner-city public transit that students, that families, that anyone could use, so that people like me, we're not congesting the road just to see our friends. And then for opportunities, I think this is a great time to make public transit more inviting. I rode the bus for the first time like the past week or so. It was great, but it was really tough to get there because I live on Belmont Boulevard right now, and the bus stop right there, it just says MTA bus stop, and there's nothing to it. And without Google searching it and looking at all the schedules, I can't just go and ride it. And hopefully they'll put more information on it, that they'll make it easier for people who's never rode public transportation in Nashville to approach it easier.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges with the buses in Nashville. They're hard to figure out what bus goes where you pick it up. And a lot of times with mass transit, the fear is you'll get pretty close to where you want to go and have no way to get all the way to where you want to go. And that's, people are like, well, I need to go to the store, but I want to carry bags of stuff or whatever. So that's.
However, we are also used to getting to the front door where we want to go, and kind of going along with mass transit is like Gabe said, is walking. Kind of the expectation you're going to do that a little more.
Well, so inner cities work. For that, or the classic European style, or New York, or whatever, where you have dense, you don't have to walk very far. If you live in Brentwood and every house is on an acre, you get 42,000 feet to walk across one lot line. But no, I'm off. I think well, I'll go into mine. I'm Dan, by the way.
Dan, you forgot to introduce yourself.
That's right. Sorry. And now I've lost my train of thought.
So at some point, you got to have this millennial generation is going to start becoming the influencers and the politicians where the decisions will start changing. But I think right now we're really right in the middle of that.
Not to mention the lobbying, part of it in government and Congress, and as we grow and this is more of a mainstream, I think it's going to feed into more lobbying efforts to get the politicians to
to make those changes.
Make it a priority.
Yeah.
I say like it's getting more and more influential as far as like I know there's a lot of the political like insurance battles with Uber and ride sharing issues. So I mean I think like the more it's incentivized and embraced by older America or older generations, it'll sort of tip that scales towards a sharing economy or a more sustainable way, mode of transportation for the future.
Change also true mindset of showing kind of cost benefit, change that direction. I think you're talking about struggle generationally of one generation is kind of used to what they know. The newer generation is bringing in something new. So then it's kind of also demonstrating kind of that benefit. He was able to do that well in DC and Chicago. Once you made some of those changes, people are easily able to adapt. They can start using it. Now you got people in seats again riding the bikes, people using the buses, to stay.
We're just part of it. Because if not, then a lot of those ideas will get thrown down the drain and say, well, it's not working economically this way. So no, that's a very good point.
Because I really, I grew up riding the bus here in Nashville. I did it in high school. So now as an adult, I want to still be able to do it. Right.
The hard part is we've hit a new normal with our operating budget.
Right.
And we're hitting new historic plateaus of ridership. But even there, in terms of, actually 538 just put out this really interesting comparison of cities and transit provision and also transit ridership. I mean, for cities in the million-person range, we are just so far behind in terms of the resources we've provided to solve that sort of problem. And that's, to me, that's why today's conversation is so important.
Exactly, and we come back to that cyclical argument of, okay, if we build it, people will do it. How are we going to come up with the money to build it? So we end up back once again in that vicious circle.
Then you're back to
and we're back to, and we got to have the buy-in, the political, and the dedicated funding.
I think part of it is we just haven't hit the pain threshold that will force people. Most people respond to coercion.
Right.
And we just, as much as we complain about traffic here, it's not LA, it's not Atlanta. And on the weekends, I live close to downtown, and I saw a sale at the Academy in Cool Springs. I just got my car, was there in 20 minutes.
Right.
Can't do that in LA on the weekends.
Can we think about it hard enough to avoid being in LA or Atlanta 25 years from now, right? If we're going to be Denver-sized by 2040, can we make some decisions right now that help us set the stage for being less like LA and more like Denver in 25 years?
So how do we go into how do we educate the public and explain to them that it's going to be painful on the front end, but it's really going to improve the overall quality of life? Because that seems to be one of the recurring things. They want it to be better environmentally, socially, and by this growth pattern, growth is painful, but you can't build your way out of congestion. So how do we educate the general public?
What's the message?
What's the message?
If you look at congestion coming into Nashville, it's even more of a problem than it's getting around Nashville.
So from an MTA perspective.
Well, just like Rutherford County, he or she, whoever it was talking about it, mentioning that Rutherford and Williamson County are growing even faster than we are. But yet, I know that for people who live in Rutherford County and work in Nashville, there are some vans that will take them back and forth each day. But, what if your kid gets sick in the middle of the day and you have to get back to Murfreesboro and you don't have that van taking you there? Or, there just aren't good options that really do link the counties that border Nashville. There are a few things. There's the train, and I think now there's something in Gallatin, but I don't know of anything except for those vans in Rutherford County, and that doesn't mean that I know all, because Lord knows now I'm retired and I miss stuff, but it's...
There's limited transit from all the counties. I think Montgomery, Clarksville just started that. I think Springfield just started. I know Gallatin has it stopping in Hendersonville. So, and I presume there's Rutherford County, Murfreesboro as routes coming in. Franklin, I would expect they have that too.
One would think. County and Williamson.
It's fairly limited, I
I wonder what the demand is really for those counties, though,
That's right.
That's sort of the outside.
I feel that if you build it, they will come.
There's some great questions. And I'll try to filter in a few slides, too, as I answer the questions. We've heard many times that reducing vehicle lanes improves traffic flow. How and why does that happen? Okay, so I have this picture up here for a reason. You think more lanes is better, right? But it depends on how you manage those lanes. The biggest congestion causer in an urban environment, there's two things. There's double parking, typically by delivery vehicles like FedEx and UPS, and construction. So first of all, if you deal with those two issues and you reform your public space and loading zones and all of that, you can actually get rid of about 30% of your congestion. Second of all, look at this picture on the left. So basically every block or so, you've got people sitting in that middle lane waiting with a left signal on, all the way up and down the corridor. So the fact is, when you get people out of that through lane, right, into the turn lane, and then you get rid of your double parking and loading zone issues, when you're down to one lane, it flows. I mean, that's a real oversimplification, but you have to improve the roadway operations. You also have to use technology. So you have to improve signal timing. You have to, I mean, there are some cases where you actually change the signal timing so that it doesn't flow as well because you want people to slow down. But during rush hour, you're going to change it maybe to 128-second signal timing. There are sensors in the roadways that you can use. But I can tell you that, just this change right here I can tell you it's saved probably 2 or 3 people's lives over the last 2 years. And I think, to be honest, for me, that's the more important measure. I mean, I'm always happy when the counters go out and we do all the diagnostics and it shows that traffic flow is better and cars are slower. But when I see the traffic fatalities go down, that's when I'm happiest. What was I going to say? Well, there's something else. I'll come back to it. There's another important point on this. I can't remember. The next question was, what do you suggest for Nashville? What should we do first? That's a broad question, but I mean, Nashville is doing so many great things. And you look at the land use and density downtown, I mean, you're doing a lot of the right things. I think that the transportation system, to be honest, is sorely lagging behind. Just to be honest with you, compared to what I see in other cities that you're competing with, the sidewalk network, while somewhat robust downtown, is not very wide. And once you leave the urban core, there are almost no sidewalks. So that's a huge problem. I think that the lack of available mass transit is a problem. When I was here last year, I tried to figure out how to take the bus. It was very confusing. I finally figured it out. The bus feels like something for a second-class citizen, which it does in a lot of places, but it doesn't feel like a premium service. Now, the new circulator bus seems like it's a lot better. That's a step in the right direction. And by the way, the AMP is a wonderful thing. It's not going to solve all your problems. That's a beginning. That is just a step forward. Like that first streetcar line that we're putting in is a down payment on the 37-mile system that we need if we're going to be competitive. And keep in mind that in DC we've got the metro system. People fought against the metro system. You're always going to have people fighting against stuff. Imagine, who's been to DC lately? Okay, can you imagine DC without the metro? No. It would be a disaster, and we wouldn't be growing by 1,300 people a month. There is no way. And the metro is just a down payment on what we need. There's no one solution. You need layers and layers and layers of options. People should be able to make their own choices. They want to drive, if they want to take the bus, if they want to walk, but you got to make it safe and appealing. So in terms of what to do first, I think building out a robust sidewalk network. I think the AMP, again, is a down payment. I think you shouldn't water it down. If you water it down, it will be a failure. If you water it down too much, it's just the bus. So Don't water it down and actually build something you can be proud of that people like you want to ride. Should developers of housing be responsible for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in home apartment developments? This is a great question too, and I mean, here's the thing. When you talk to developers, and I talk to developers all day long in my current role, they don't want to build parking spaces. And part of my presentation later on, which I didn't get to, talks about why parking garages, if you're building parking garages, for the most part, you are wasting your money. They're going to be worthless in less than a decade. So no developer, and I talked to them, they don't want to spend $65,000 a parking space. They'd much rather spend money on bike and ped and transit improvements. And I've seen situations recently in Florida where a developer tried to put millions of dollars into transit, and we're told, nope, you got to build more parking. So the developers in many cases are way ahead of the government. And these are people that know how to make money and know how to build things. Let me see if I can show you a picture. So, you know, people think that autonomous cars are way out in the future. Well, Elon Musk, who's not somebody that I tend to question, when he says he's going to do something, he usually does it. He's going to have a self-driving car. You can turn it on and off by 2017. There's a Daimler just put out their self-driving semi-truck. So you're going to have self-driving cars proliferating on the streets within 10 years. Now, what's important about that? Well, obviously safety will change dramatically. But that means that we don't need all these parking spaces anymore. If you live in a big city, like I do, which, you know, has its ups and downs, but even car sharing is being affected. Uber, Lyft, these companies are displacing car ownership left and right, and even other car services. Particularly for, and in Florida we had this conversation, for elderly people that either don't want to drive or can't drive anymore, it's been hugely helpful. The autonomous car combined with the rideshare service means that most people won't need to own a car anymore, along with all the density that's happening. Again, you're going to have the naysayers. You're going to have people say, no, it's not going to happen. I can tell you, I've been to Google, I've ridden in the autonomous car. It's happening. It's going to happen fast. And the people are way ahead of us. The people, not only do they say they're ready for autonomous cars, they would rather that their kids drive autonomously than with themselves, which I think tells you something. Between distracted driving, drinking and driving, taxi drivers who drive 12-hour shifts and are tired, we're going to be better off with autonomous cars. And it may function a little bit differently than people think. So anyway, back to the original question, I think that we got to rethink the way we're building things, and the developers know this. And if the cities work with them, we can build a lot more units, a lot less parking, make the economics work, and then we'll actually have more affordable housing. If paint and bollards are simple and cheap, why build a major change out of concrete in the middle of a major arterial, which is permanent, in lieu of experimenting with paint and bollards to test whether this major change really works and is acceptable to the citizens whose taxes are paying for it? Excellent question. I have so many different answers to that, but basically we are putting paint and bollards up. I mean, if you look back at the BRT that I showed you from Chicago, see if I can find the picture again. But yeah, we are using paint and bollards, but then you have to have some sort of station. And if you make an investment in a nice station, people are more apt to use it. I mean, you can make the same argument about building a highway. Like, why build a highway and not just sort of a big dirt road? Well, because a big dirt road is just not the same quality. So I think the question is, though, and this is something, because the last bit is important. It says, whose taxes are paying for it? And I think this is something that we need to talk about, because people think that roads are paid for by the gas tax, and it's just not true. As was noted earlier, the gas tax has been pegged at 18.6 cents since 1992. It was never pegged to CPI or inflation. So basically, it's paying for a very small percentage of roads. So the fact is, and again, this is from a guy who's not anti-car, but just a pragmatist and a capitalist, I'm telling you that automobiles are the most subsidized form of transportation. And the fact is that you won't get any investments around an auto-centric road for the most part. I mean, you'll get some, but the maintenance costs far outweigh the investments. Now, you build a tram line, a streetcar line, a metro line, or a bus rapid transit line, and I guarantee you, you'll get at least 1x, and you can look at the numbers, you'll get 1x return, but some people are seeing up to 10x return. And I don't care if, and this sounds harsh, but I don't care if the BRT costs $50 billion. If you get $50 billion worth of investment around it, who cares? It doesn't matter how much it costs. What matters is, what are you leveraging? How much are you getting out of it? People are way too focused on, oh, this project's gonna be 120 million. Yeah, compared to what? And we spent $3 trillion on wars the last few years, nobody had a problem with that. But when we invest in our own infrastructure, people have a problem. And I think it is an honest conversation that we need to have. We got to stop subsidizing cars and roads. And by the way, Bill Ford will tell you this, and the defense industry. Ooh, that's getting a little political. Okay. Do the riders have a pass for all modes, train, bus, bike, etc.? Ideally, yes. They'll be more profitable. I'm a big believer that we should design these systems to be profitable, to take as little subsidy as possible. And the way to do that is to reduce the friction to use them. I mean, it's one of the reasons. Also, don't water them down, make them useful services. Helsinki is actually doing this, and they are creating a pass that will be useful not just on the public sector transportation services, but the private sector transportation services as well. So they're really the leading model. And I know when I flew into Copenhagen, they have a one card you get as a tourist that not only gets you on every mode of transportation, but also gets you in the museums, gets you like a free coffee at the whatever. I mean, so the Europeans are way ahead of us, and yes, I think we'll get there. I think this will get us there a lot quicker. It's very hard to create a card, but the smart kids in Silicon Valley and other cities are figuring out how to leverage this. I probably have one more question left. Let me see if there's a particularly divisive one I can choose. Pick one or all. How do we persuade big corporations that host the ginormous parking lots out in especially suburban areas? Well, I mean, I think, what my boss in Chicago did is he tried to lure all the corporations back into the city, and he's pretty successful getting a lot of them to move downtown. Again, we have a land use problem, so if they move downtown, you tell them they can't have any parking. Because the problem is you build parking and you create the problem. It's an endless problem. More capacity on the road, more parking means more congestion. So you get the companies to move downtown, you give tax breaks, you encourage the people that work there to also live downtown. You provide, like for instance, what's that company that provides the internet on the airplane? All right, I guess I'm the only one that flies like 5 times a week, but anyway, there's a company that provides internet on almost every major airline. And they were moving to downtown Chicago, and they said the big reason they were moving, besides the mayor strong-arming them and giving them tax breaks and stuff, was that we were building the BRT line right next to the building, next to Union Station. And they have thousands of employees. So that, for them, that was the tip for them that made it work. I'll just take one more. How was the state DOT's reception to the mobility changes that have been made? It's, in most states, or most cities, they have a pretty contentious relationship with the DOT when they're trying to innovate fast. But I have to tell you guys something. The federal government is all but, I don't know what to call it, not dead, but I mean, they don't do anything. I mean, talk about a do-nothing Congress. They passed 153 bills this year. I think I saw in 60 Minutes that Hoover said that their do-nothing Congress, which he really complained about, passed 900 bills. I mean, that's how bad Congress is. There's nothing happening at the federal level. And the state level, there's some stuff happening, but the cities is where all the action is. All the change is being driven at the city level, and people at the federal level will tell you that. I was at the White House last week, and they're very interested in all this change happening in cities, because they can't get anything done at the federal level. So The state DOTs can be great partners, but they usually need to see some success. And so, it's very important to work with them. Pilot programs can be very helpful so that they can gauge the receptivity politically and see some success. And then I think often they will get on board. But sometimes you really have to take on the state DOT. And I'll just close with, there's some new design guidelines put out by NACTO. I'm on the board of NACTO, the North American City Transportation Officials, which is sort of the city version of AASHTO. Oh, and by the way, somebody asked what TOD is. That's transit-oriented development. That was another question. Anyway, there's some new design guidelines. A lot of states are adopting it, including Minnesota and California, much more urban focused. So I encourage you to check it out. That's one of the ways we're bridging the gap between states and cities. Thank you.
I was going to beg one more question of Gabe, because one came in late that has come up a lot in the conversations surrounding the AMP. When you have that right of way and you're reallocating it, some for BRT or some for bike lanes or whatever, how do the businesses get their deliveries? What have you seen?
It depends a little bit on the context, and these designs have to be context sensitive. And I know when I took the tour today, there's a lot of people looking block by block by block at all of this stuff. But if you're in a dense sort of grid in an urban core, it depends on if you have alleys or don't have alleys. If you're out in a more suburban area, it depends on where they take deliveries. Most of these places take them in the back, but if there are blocks where they take them in the front, that's the only place they can take them, not on the side street. You have to sort of balance that if you need to get rid of parking. And it's amazing. People are very concerned about loading and parking. And what it takes often is going out there, spending time one-on-one with the business owner and figuring out exactly how to configure it. And that's what we did in Chicago. And I think we were able to overcome most of the objections. There's always going to be a few people that are not going to be happy, though. But you have to, do what's for the greater good ultimately, and you try to make everybody as happy as possible.
All right, thanks again to Gabe for letting us have him be a part of our presentation tonight. Thank you, Gabe. I did want to just close with a few kind of logistical and housekeeping things. Wanted to remind everybody that this summer we're picking between preferred futures. You can do it online. If you want to go to a meeting, we've got Nashville Next lounges. You can do it there. You can text us and let us know. So if you go to nashvillenext.net/pick, then you can let us know what future you'd like to see for Nashville in the coming 25 years. Finally, I wanted to let everybody know that Gabe is here for a ULI event that's occurring tomorrow morning. It's by RSVP only. However, we are also going to have Metro 3 streaming that live. So that starts, there's a conversation at 8, and the actual event begins at 8:30 in the morning. And so if people are wanting to see that and hear Gabe speak again, any of your friends who couldn't make it tonight, that'll be streaming live on Metro 3, which you can find on Nashville.gov's website. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out tonight. Continue your table conversation as long as you need to, and we appreciate your interest in the topic. Thank you.